This video explores how double consciousness can be applied to the LGBTQ population and the events of the Stonewall riots in New York City and their role in the subsequent emergence of the gay rights movement that continues to this day. The term double consciousness was first coined by W.E.B. Du Bois in an article called Strivings of the Negro People and refers to a peculiar sensation, this double consciousness, the sense of always looking at oneself through the eyes of others, of measuring one's soul by the tape of a world that looks on in amused contempt and pity. In the years since its publication, the concept of this double consciousness, the constant struggle to reconcile one's identity within society when they belong to a traditionally oppressed population, has been applied to other forms of social inequalities, such as women living in a patriarchal society. To understand how the Stonewall riots, a two-night confrontation between police and the members of the gay community in Greenwich Village, began, it is essential to understand the historical standing of homosexuality in the 20th century United States. At the time, homosexuality was an aspect of the self to be hidden, and the meeting groups of gays and lesbians went by vague names that did not directly refer to homosexuality in order to keep the group members safe from repercussions in an unaccepting and homophobic world. Not only this, but the groups actually encouraged members to assimilate into society and provided strategies for keeping one's private homosexual life as separate from their public professional life. It is this attitude that was a survival strategy at the time that unfortunately had the consequence of fostering the double consciousness within the community, making it so that there was no comfortable way for a gay person to be fully out and still be integrated into society at large. However, the emergence of the civil rights movement and the women's rights movement had a large impact in combating this double consciousness of hiding one's sexual orientation, and in the emotional and cognitive shift that resulted in the conflict of the Stonewall riots. Within the protest-heavy social environment of the 60s, the gay youth of New York had learned that oppressed groups were standing up for their rights and succeeding in obtaining the results and legislative changes they wanted through protest. So, when the Mafia-owned club was raided on June 28, 1969, the gay community decided to fight back. Initially, police entered the club, sealed the entrances and exits, and began to sequester and separate the men from the women in order to arrest them and funnel the patrons into the police wagons waiting outside. When the patrons, many of them cross-dressing that evening, a crime in New York City at the time, were hit with nightsticks and sexually harassed during frisking, the already volatile situation became violent. The oppression the gay community had suffered had generated so much pressure within the population that the events of the night erupted into irrevocable forward motion. The police tried to gain control of the growing crowd outside the bar and were humiliated, unable to stop the protests until 4 a.m. The next night, the unrest was repeated, this time urged on by those drawn in by indignation of the events of the previous evening, once again ensuring street conflict that lasted till the early hours of the morning. In the wake of the conflict, the initial transcendence by the community from the double consciousness is evident in the emergence of activist groups like the Gay Liberation Front and the Gay Activist Alliance. Both organizations formed after the Stonewall riots, and both organizations that chose not to obscure their gay identity within their name. Some of the early protests after Stonewall showcased homosexual displays of affection. Something as innocent as hand-holding between two men or two women was a revolutionary act of defiance at the time, and seeing it in public was a nonverbal protest of societal standards that attempted to suppress gay people. Additionally, the riots spurred the gay pride movement and the pride parades that are held worldwide around the end of June in order to commemorate the decisive and brave actions of the Stonewall participants. Almost immediately after Stonewall, the social stigma of homosexuality was no longer enough to force gay people to hide their orientation. In fact, the impact of the Stonewall riots on the gay community at large was significant enough for the inn to be declared a national monument in 2016, solidifying the riots as one of the points of impetus for the LGBTQ movement. This video